life was comfortable. Predictable, even. I had a stable job, a nice house, and a marriage that, by all outward appearances, was solid. We weren't the kind of couple that posted about each other on social media every day, but we had our rituals: Sunday morning coffee, late-night TV marathons, and the occasional spontaneous dinner date. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 11 years. We had built a life together, full of shared memories, inside jokes, and the kind of unspoken understanding that only long-term couples develop. She was a project manager for a marketing firm, while I worked in IT. Our lives were busy but not chaotic. We were comfortable. Or so I thought. In hindsight, the cracks were there, subtle but persistent. Emily had been working late more often. At first, I didn't think much of it: deadlines, client demands, the usual. But then came the little changes. The way she started keeping her phone face down on the table. The sudden interest in going to the gym after years of rolling her eyes at the idea. The way she would glance at me when she thought I wasn't looking, like she was measuring something. Then, there was the perfume. Emily had always worn light, floral scents, something fresh and understated. One night, as she came home late from work, I caught a different fragrance clinging to her clothes. It was heavier, musky, and entirely unfamiliar. New perfume? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then she smiled, that same easy smile she always gave me. Oh, yeah. One of the girls at work had a bottle she didn't like, so she gave it to me. That seemed reasonable. It wasn't like Emily to buy expensive perfumes for herself. And yet, something about the way she answered didn't sit right. I didn't push. I told myself I was imagining things. Then came the messages. It started small, her phone buzzing late at night, just as she was heading to the shower. A text notification that she'd swipe away too quickly. A name I didn't recognize. Ben. Work stuff, she said when I asked. Some client is being impossible. I had no reason to doubt her. But I did. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe I was reading into things too much. But once suspicion takes root, it doesn't let go. Then, last Saturday, something happened that changed everything. Emily had gone out for drinks with work friends. I had no issue with that, she deserved to unwind. But as I sat at home, flipping through channels, something felt off. At 10:30 p.m., I called her, just to check in. She didn't pick up. We had the kind of marriage where we didn't keep tabs on each other, so I told myself to relax. I waited 20 minutes and called again. No answer. By midnight, I was pacing the living room, my stomach twisting into knots. I texted, "Hey, everything okay?" No reply. At 12:45 a.m., just as I was about to get in the car and start driving around looking for her, the front door opened. Emily walked in, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. The scent of that musky perfume hit me immediately. "Sorry, my phone died," she said casually, setting her purse down. I stared at her, trying to read her expression. Was that guilt? Or was I imagining it? "Did you have fun?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Yeah, it was fine." She didn't elaborate. She just yawned and stretched. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed." And just like that, the conversation was over. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of Emily's breathing. Something was wrong. And I was going to find out what. I didn't plan to go looking for trouble. I wanted to believe her. Maybe that's why I ignored the signs for as long as I did. The late nights, the guarded phone, the sudden distance between us, it could all be explained, right? Work stress, a midlife crisis, even just drifting apart. But deep down, I knew. And once you suspect something, it eats at you. The first clue. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made coffee, checked my emails, and waited for Emily to wake up. She strolled into the kitchen around 9:30, stretching like she had all the time in the world. She kissed me on the cheek, but it felt mechanical. Forced. "Good morning," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Late night," I said casually. She nodded. "Yeah, we lost track of time. I barely had any battery left on my phone when I got home." It was a small detail, but one that stuck with me. Barely had any battery left. That wasn't the same as my phone died, which is what she told me last night. It was a minor inconsistency, but it planted a seed in my mind. And that seed started to grow. Later that day, when she was in the shower, I saw her purse sitting on the dining table. Normally, I wouldn't even think about looking inside, but my gut was screaming at me. I hesitated. My hands were shaking as I reached for it. I wasn't expecting to find anything, maybe just a receipt, maybe a hint of something. But as I rummaged through the side pocket, my fingers brushed against something unexpected. A hotel key card. I pulled it out and stared at it like it was some kind of foreign object. The logo read the Ridgewood Suites. My stomach twisted into a knot. Emily never mentioned a hotel. I shoved the keycard back into her purse just as I heard the bathroom door open. She walked out in a towel, humming to herself, completely unaware that my world was starting to crack at the edges. The spiral begins. That night, I barely spoke. My mind was spinning in circles, trying to piece together the truth. I needed more information. The next day, while she was at work, I drove to the Ridgewood Suites. My heart pounded the whole way there. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. At the front desk, a young woman greeted me with a smile. "Hi, I think my wife left something here the other night," I said, trying to sound casual. She was here with some colleagues and might have forgotten something in the room. The receptionist typed on her computer. "What's the name?" I hesitated. If Emily was cheating, she wouldn't have used her real name. I swallowed. Emily Parker." She nodded and clicked around. "She checked in 3 nights ago. Checked out the next morning." I felt my hands clench into fists. "Right," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks." That was it. That was all I needed. Emily had lied to me. She didn't just go out for drinks with work friends, she spent the night at a hotel. But with who? The confirmation. That evening, Emily was on her phone more than usual. Every time I walked into the room, she turned the screen away slightly. Not enough to be obvious, just enough. I needed proof. I wasn't proud of what I did next, but I had no other choice. While she was in the shower, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. It was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. My hand shook as I typed it in. I went straight to her messages. And that's when I found him. Ben. The same name that had been popping up in her notifications late at night. I scrolled through the texts, my vision blurring with rage. "Ben, last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. Emily, me too. I wish we could have stayed longer. Ben, I miss you already. Emily, same. I hate sneaking around, but I don't know what else to do." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't just emotional distance. My wife was cheating on me. And she was in love with him. The breakdown. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and walked out of the bedroom, my hands trembling. I sat in the living room, staring at the wall, my mind blank. I had imagined this moment so many times in the last few weeks. I thought I'd feel anger. I thought I'd explode, flip over the table, break something. But all I felt was hollow. Like something inside me had died. When Emily walked into the room, towel-drying her hair, she noticed my expression. "You okay?" she asked. I forced a nod. "Yeah. Just tired." She gave me a strange look, but didn't push it. For the next few days, I pretended everything was normal. I had to. I needed time to think, to plan. I couldn't just confront her, not yet. Instead, I gathered more evidence. I installed a small camera in the living room, just in case they ever met here. I checked our bank statements and found a charge for the Ridgewood Suites. I even tailed her one night after she said she was working late. She wasn't. She was with him. They met at a small coffee shop, sitting in the corner, whispering, laughing, touching. I took pictures. I recorded the timestamps. I documented everything. And then, I waited. Because the moment of truth was coming. And Emily had no idea what was about to hit her. I never imagined my life would come to this. I had always thought of myself as a reasonable man, someone who could handle problems with logic, not emotion. But logic had no place here. My wife, Emily, the woman I had trusted for over a decade, was having an affair. I had the proof. The messages, the hotel receipts, the late-night meetings. I had even seen them together. And yet, I still hadn't confronted her. Because once you say it out loud, there's no going back. But I was done waiting. Setting the trap. The night I decided to confront her, I made sure everything was perfect. I set up my laptop in the living room, connecting it to the TV. I had gathered every piece of evidence, screenshots of her texts, the hotel charge on our joint credit card, even the photos I took of her and Ben together. I wanted her to see it all. She had no idea what was coming. At around 7 p.m., Emily walked through the front door, carrying a bag of groceries like it was just another normal evening. "Hey," she said, kicking off her heels. "What do you want for dinner?" I didn't answer. She looked up, noticing the way I was sitting rigid, hands clasped, staring straight ahead. "Steve," she asked, her voice uncertain. "Sit down," I said. She frowned. "What? Why?" "Just sit," I repeated. Something in my tone must have told her this wasn't a request. She slowly walked over to the couch and lowered herself onto the cushion. I picked up the remote and pressed play. The evidence. The TV screen flickered, and the first thing that appeared was a screenshot of her text conversation with Ben. Her face went pale. I watched as her eyes darted across the messages, scanning each damning line. "The I miss yous, the last night was amazing, the I hate sneaking around, but I don't know what else to do." Then came the hotel receipt. Then the photos. The final image was one I had taken just 2 nights ago, her and Ben in that tiny coffee shop, leaning in close, whispering. Her hand on his. I let it all sink in. The room was dead silent. When I finally turned to look at her, I saw it the moment realization hit. Not just the realization that I knew, but the realization that there was no way out. Her mouth opened, then closed. She swallowed hard, like she was trying to find the right words. But there were none. I spoke first. "How long?" My voice was eerily calm. She hesitated, blinking rapidly. "Steve, How? Long?" I repeated, cutting her off. She looked down, her fingers twisting in her lap. "A few months. A few months." I took a slow breath, pressing my palms into my thighs to stop them from shaking. "Why?" I asked. Emily opened her mouth, then stopped. I could see the war in her eyes, whether to lie, to make excuses, or to tell the truth. She chose the latter. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "It just did?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "I met him through work. We started talking, and she stopped herself." "He what?" I pushed. "He made me feel different," she said finally. I clenched my jaw. "Different how?" Emily squeezed her eyes shut, as if saying the words would physically hurt her. "Like I mattered," she admitted. "Like I wasn't just part of a routine." I stared at her. "So that's what this is about? You were bored?" She flinched. "No. It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me, because from where I'm sitting, it's exactly that simple. She shook her head. Steve, I love you. I do. But somewhere along the way, things just changed. I barked out a laugh. Changed? You mean somewhere along the way you decided to screw another man behind my back? Emily winced. I didn't mean to hurt you. That was it. That was the moment my patience snapped. I stood up so fast the coffee table rattled. Oh, well, that's just fantastic, Emily. You didn't mean to hurt me. That makes it all okay, right? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Please, Steve, Save it, I cut her off. You don't get to cry. You did this. You made this choice. And now you have to live with it. She wiped at her face. What now? She whispered. I laughed again, a harsh, broken sound. You tell me, Emily. What do you think happens now? Silence. She knew. I could see it in her eyes, the understanding that this wasn't something we could come back from. I shook my head. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and irreversible. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. No. No? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. She shook her head frantically. Steve, please. We can fix this. Fix this? I repeated, my voice rising. How do you fix something like this, Emily? Tell me. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I'll end it with him, she promised. I swear. We can go to therapy, we can. I cut her off with a cold laugh. You think this is just about ending it with him? It's about the fact that you already did it. She sobbed. I made a mistake. No, I corrected. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something hurtful in an argument. A mistake isn't months of lying, sneaking around, and screwing another man. She covered her face, her shoulders shaking. I just stood there, watching her fall apart. And I felt nothing. I had spent weeks drowning in my own pain, my own betrayal. I had felt everything there was to feel. But now? I was done. I turned and started walking toward the door. Steve, wait. Emily's voice cracked as she scrambled to her feet. Please don't do this. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I didn't look back as I spoke. You already did. And with that, I walked out. I walked out that night with no plan, no destination, just a desperate need to get away. My hands were shaking as I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me together. I could still hear her voice in my head. Steve, please. We can fix this. Fix what? The fact that she had spent months sneaking around with another man? The fact that every I love you she had whispered to me had been a lie? I couldn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I drove. I don't even remember where I went at first. The streets blurred together, the neon glow of passing buildings reflecting off the windshield. My mind was a hurricane: anger, grief, humiliation, all clashing against each other in a violent storm. Eventually, I found myself in a parking lot outside a 24-hour diner. I didn't go inside. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to decide what the hell to do next. Divorce. That was the obvious answer. I had told Emily that's what I wanted, and I meant it. But a small, dark part of me didn't want to make it that easy for her. She had burned our marriage to the ground. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to suffer. The revenge plan. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, the lawyer. The kind who made sure cheating spouses walked away with nothing. His name was Mark Holloway. He had a reputation for being ruthless, and that was exactly what I needed. I sat in his office, my hands clasped together, my mind still numb. So, Mark said, tapping his pen on the desk. Tell me everything. And I did. I told him about the late nights, the hotel receipts, the texts. I showed him the evidence I had gathered, screenshots, timestamps, photos. He nodded, flipping through the folder. Good. This is exactly what we need. What's the next step? I asked, my voice flat. He leaned back in his chair. First, we file for divorce. Since you have proof of infidelity, we can use that to argue for a better settlement. Do you have joint accounts? I nodded. Then I suggest moving half of the money into a separate account before she does. That part stung. Emily had been my partner for over a decade, and now I had to think of her as an opponent. But she had already treated me like one, hadn't she? Mark continued, do you want to go after the house? I thought about it. The house where we built our life together. The house where I had once felt safe. No, I said. Let her keep it. I don't want to stay there anyway. He smirked. That's surprisingly generous. I don't care about the house, I admitted. I care about making sure she regrets this for the rest of her life. Mark's smirk widened. Now that I can help with destroying her life. Step 1 was simple, cutting her off financially. Emily and I had joint savings, but I followed Mark's advice and moved half of it into an account under my name. It wasn't illegal, just smart. Step 2, I contacted her boss. Emily had told me she and Ben worked together. If their affair had taken place during office hours, that could be considered misconduct. I sent an anonymous email to the company's HR department with all the evidence attached. I didn't know what would happen next, but I had a feeling it wouldn't be good for either of them. Step 3, I made sure everyone knew the truth. I didn't do it out of pettiness, okay, maybe a little bit, but mostly, I wanted to reclaim my dignity. I told our friends. I told her family. I told my family. And just like that, Emily's perfect little world started to collapse. The fallout. It took less than a week for everything to implode. Emily called me in a panic 3 days after I met with the lawyer. What the hell did you do? She demanded. I leaned back in my chair. You'll have to be more specific. My boss called me into his office today. Someone sent HR everything, the texts, the hotel receipts, the photos. I stayed silent, letting her spiral. Ben is married, Steve. His wife found out. He got fired. And now they're investigating me. I almost laughed. Sounds like karma. You're a bastard, she spat. I shrugged. No, Emily. I'm just playing by the same rules you did. She was breathing heavily. You ruined my life. I clenched my jaw. No, Emily. You did. And then I hung up. Second thoughts. For a while, I felt victorious. Emily was drowning in the consequences of her own choices. She had lost her affair partner, her reputation, and possibly her job. But then something unexpected happened. I started feeling empty. I had gotten my revenge. I had made her pay. And yet, at night, when I lay in bed, I didn't feel better. I just felt alone. A different path. One evening, I sat at a bar, sipping a drink, trying to figure out why I still felt like shit. That's when an older man next to me spoke up. Rough night? He asked. I glanced at him. He had silver hair, a worn-out leather jacket, and the kind of tired eyes that had seen too much. Rough month, I corrected. He nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. You married? He asked. Not for much longer, I muttered. He let out a low chuckle. Divorce? Yeah. Let me guess, she cheated. I raised an eyebrow. How'd you know? He took a sip of his whiskey. Because I've been there, kid. I exhaled. How'd you handle it? He smirked. At first? Like an idiot. I tried to ruin her life. Thought if she suffered, I'd feel better. I stiffened. And did you? His smirk faded. No. Just made me feel like her. I stared at him. He clapped me on the shoulder. Listen, I'm not saying don't stand up for yourself. But don't let revenge be the thing that defines you. It's not worth it. I left the bar that night with a lot to think about. Making a choice. I had already set the divorce in motion. I had already ensured Emily would face the fallout of her actions. But I realized I didn't need to spend another second of my life thinking about her. She had already stolen enough of my time. So, I made a choice. I withdrew the last of my things from the house. I signed the divorce papers without a second thought. And then, I moved on. Because revenge might feel good in the moment. But peace lasts a hell of a lot longer. I thought I was done with her. After everything, I had convinced myself that Emily was just a chapter 1 had closed, a mistake I had learned from and moved on. The divorce papers were signed, my things were gone from the house, and I had started adjusting to a life without her. But closure is never that easy, is it? A week after our final phone call, she showed up. An unwanted visit. It was a Thursday evening. I had just gotten home from work, carrying a 6-pack of beer and a takeout container, ready to sink into my couch and watch something brainless. Then my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My first thought was that it was the neighbor, maybe needing help with something. But when I opened the door, it was her. Emily. She looked different. Tired. Hair pulled into a messy ponytail, no makeup, eyes slightly puffy like she'd been crying. I felt nothing. I let the silence stretch between us. I know I'm the last person you want to see, she finally said. I leaned against the doorframe. Then why are you here? She exhaled shakily. Can I come in? I gave a humorless laugh. No. She flinched at the coldness in my voice, but I didn't care. She had lost the right to my kindness a long time ago. Steve, please, she tried again. I need to talk to you. I crossed my arms. Talk, then. She hesitated, like she hadn't expected me to be this indifferent. Good. Her confession. I lost my job. I didn't react. She took a deep breath. After everything came out, HR did an internal review. Ben was fired immediately, but they put me on leave while they investigated. And? I asked, uninterested. Her lips trembled. They let me go. I tilted my head slightly. So? Her eyes widened a little, as if she expected me to care. Steve, this is my career. My reputation is destroyed. Nobody in the industry will hire me now. I cut her off. I don't see how that's my problem. She swallowed hard, looking down. I know. I wanted you to know that I regret it. All of it. I didn't respond. I wish I could take it back, she whispered. I clenched my jaw. Yeah? Well, you can't. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer. Then she took a shaky breath. I miss you. I exhaled through my nose, trying to keep my temper in check. You miss me? I repeated, shaking my head. No, Emily. You miss the life you had before you burned it to the ground. You miss the security. You miss not being alone. But you don't miss me. Her lips parted, like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Because she knew I was right. She had chosen Ben. She had thrown me away. And now that her affair had crashed and burned, she thought she could just come back? No. I wasn't her safety net. The final goodbye. I was stupid, she admitted, her voice cracking. I took you for granted. I thought. What? I interrupted, narrowing my eyes. You thought I'd just sit around and wait for you to figure out that you ruined the best thing in your life? She looked away. That's the thing, Emily, I said, my voice calm. I did love you. I really did. And if you had come to me, if you had talked to me about how you were feeling, maybe we could have worked through it. But you didn't. You chose to lie. You chose him. Her shoulders shook. I don't love him, she whispered. I laughed. Yeah, well, you don't love me either. You just don't want to be alone. She broke down then. Right there, on my doorstep. But I didn't comfort her. I didn't touch her. I just watched. Let her feel what it was like to lose everything. After a while, she sniffled and wiped her face. I know I don't deserve it, she said, but could you ever forgive me? I stared at her for a long time. Then, finally, I said, no. Her face crumpled. And I shut the door in her face. Moving forward. That night, I sat on my couch with a beer, staring at the ceiling, letting everything sink in. I thought about the life I had lost. The future I had imagined with her. The trust that had been shattered. But for the first time since this nightmare started, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. She had come back, hoping for some kind of redemption. Hoping I would take her pain away. But that wasn't my job anymore. Emily was nothing more than a lesson now. And I had finally learned it. It had been 6 months since I shut the door in Emily's face. Half a year since I last saw her, since I last heard her voice, since I last let myself care about the woman who had torn my world apart. And yet, the memories still lingered. Not in the way they used to, not with pain, not with rage, not with that gut-wrenching mix of betrayal and loss. No, now they were just memories. Old echoes of a life I no longer belonged to. It wasn't easy. At first, I had drowned myself in distractions, work, the gym, fixing up my new apartment, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to her. But avoidance wasn't healing, and I knew that. The real healing came in waves. Some days, I felt nothing. Other days, I'd catch myself thinking about the good times, the early years of our marriage, the laughter, the little inside jokes that only made sense to us. And for a moment, I'd wonder if she ever thought about them too. But then I'd remind myself, she's not the same person anymore. And neither am I. The ghosts of the past. One evening, I was cleaning out a box of old things when I found it, our wedding photo. Emily was smiling up at me, her eyes full of love, full of promise. And I looked so damn happy. I stared at the picture for a long time. Then, without hesitation, I ripped it in half. Not out of anger. Not out of bitterness. But because that man, the one in the photo, was gone. And it was time to stop holding on to him. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The unexpected encounter. Life has a funny way of testing you. Just when you think you've moved on, the past sneaks up on you when you least expect it. It happened at the grocery store. I was walking down the frozen food aisle, minding my own business, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Steve? I turned. And there she was. Emily. I hadn't seen her since the night she showed up at my apartment, begging for forgiveness. She looked different now, thinner, tired, like life had kicked her around a little. I felt nothing. Hey, she said, offering a small, hesitant smile. I gave a nod. Emily. An awkward silence stretched between us. How have you been? She finally asked. I shrugged. Fine. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. I moved. Got a new job. Good for you, I said, with zero emotion. Another pause. Then she sighed. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. Again. I tilted my head. You already said that. I know. She swallowed. But I just wanted you to know that I meant it. I stared at her for a moment. Then I nodded. Okay. That was it. That was all I had to say. She searched my face for something, maybe hope, maybe regret, but found nothing. After a few seconds, she forced another smile. "Well, take care of yourself, Steve." "You too." And just like that, she walked away. I watched her go, expecting to feel something: anger, sadness, nostalgia. But all I felt was relief. She was just a person now. Not my wife. Not my betrayer. Not my heartbreak. Just a stranger. The road ahead. That was the moment I knew I had won. Not because I had destroyed her life. Not because I had gotten revenge. But because she no longer had power over me. I was free. A few weeks later, I went on my first date in years. It wasn't anything serious, just coffee with a woman I met through a friend. Her name was Lisa. She was kind, funny, and had the kind of smile that made you forget about all the bad things in the world. For the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me. Not love. Not yet. But hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.